He was a man people trusted, a soldier, a leader, a name whispered with respect. Julius Caesar did not begin as a tyrant. He began as hope. He walked into Rome like a savior. The people cheered, the streets filled with voices that believed in him. He gave them victories. He gave them stability. He gave them something they had almost forgotten: control. And slowly, something changed. Power stayed, power grew, power stopped asking for permission. He did not step back. He stepped forward. And Rome began to feel smaller around him. The men who once stood beside him started to whisper in the dark. Not because they hated him, but because they feared what he was becoming. A man who could not be stopped. A man who could not be replaced. A man who might never give power back. On one quiet morning, he walked toward the Roman Senate. No army, no fear, no hesitation. Just a man walking into history. They greeted him like friends. They stood close, too close. And then, steel flashed. Not from enemies, from allies. From men he trusted. From men who believed they were saving Rome by killing the man who had saved it. And in that final moment, power meant nothing. Because the question was never how he rose. It was this: how much power is too much before a hero becomes something else? They believed they were saving Rome. That's what they told themselves as the blood hit the floor. But Rome was already breaking, long before Julius Caesar walked into that room. It wasn't one man. It was a system, cracking from the inside. Men in power stopped listening, stopped serving, started taking. The Roman Republic looked strong from the outside. Marble, columns, order. But inside, it was something else. Greed, fear, endless competition. The rich grew richer, the poor grew invisible. And the Senate, the place meant to protect the people, became a battlefield of egos. Deals made in whispers, promises broken in daylight. No one trusted anyone. Not really. Power was no longer a duty. It became a game. And the rules only mattered if you were weak. Men rose fast, fell faster. All of them chasing something they could never hold for long. And in that chaos, Rome didn't need a hero. It needed control. It needed someone willing to cross lines others wouldn't. Because when a system starts to fail, people don't ask for fairness. They ask for stability, even if it comes with a cost. Even if it comes from one man. So the real question was never why Caesar took power. It was this: what happens when a broken system creates the perfect man to break it completely? He grew up watching it all fall apart, not from a throne, but from the edges of power. Julius Caesar was not born into control. He was born into pressure. A name that once mattered. A family that had already begun to fade. He learned early, Rome did not reward the patient. It rewarded the bold. So he became bold. Not loud, not reckless. Calculated. You watched how men lied, how they smiled and betrayed, how power moved quietly. And he adapted. Every step forward came with risk. Enemies noticed him. Some tried to stop him. They failed. Because he didn't think like them. Where others hesitated, he moved. Where others followed rules, he bent them. And sometimes he broke them. There was a moment on a dark sea when pirates took him hostage. A young man, outnumbered, powerless. But he didn't beg. He laughed. He told them they had no idea who they had captured. And when he was free, he came back. Not for revenge. For proof. Proof that fear was something he did not carry. That was the difference. Rome was full of men chasing power. But he believed power was already his. All he had to do was take it. And maybe that's where it began. Not in the Senate, not in war, but in a belief, quiet, dangerous, that he was meant to rise. So the question is, when a man truly believes he is destined for power, who can ever convince him to stop? He knew he couldn't do it alone. Not yet. Julius Caesar had the ambition. But ambition without power is just a risk. So he looked for something else. Leverage. He found it in two men. Pompey, a war hero, loved by the people. And Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Three men, three different kinds of power. Respect, money, ambition. They didn't trust each other. Not really. But they needed each other. So they made a deal. Not in public, not in law. In shadows. Each one giving just enough to get something bigger in return. For a moment, it worked. Doors opened, positions followed, and Caesar began to rise faster than anyone expected. But power built this way comes with a cost. Because alliances are not friendships. They are temporary, fragile, and always waiting to break. He smiled beside them, shook their hands. But he was already thinking ahead. Because he didn't want power shared. He wanted power owned. And this alliance, it wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because once you learn how to use people to climb, it becomes very hard to stop climbing. So the question is, when power is built on fragile trust, what happens when that trust finally breaks? He needed more than influence. More than deals made in shadows. Julius Caesar needed something Rome could not ignore. Victory. So he went where power is earned the hard way. War. Far from Rome, in Gaul. Cold land. Unfamiliar ground. no applause waiting for him. Just risk. And men willing to follow him into it. He didn't just command them. He walked with them, fought beside them, shared the same danger. That's how loyalty is built. Not in speeches, in survival. Battle after battle, he kept winning. Not always clean, not always merciful, but effective. Villages burned, armies crushed, enemies erased. Rome called it glory, but on the ground, it felt like something else. Because victory has a cost, and someone always pays it. Still, the results were undeniable. His name spread, not just as a politician, but as something far more dangerous. A general, a man with an army that answered to him, not to Rome. That was the shift. Quiet, but irreversible. Because power in Rome used to come from votes. Now, it came from soldiers, from steel, from loyalty that couldn't be bought, only earned in blood. And Caesar understood that better than anyone. He wrote his own story, sent it back to Rome, carefully, not just to inform, but to shape how people saw him. A hero, a protector, a man chosen by destiny. And the people believed it. That's the danger of victory. It doesn't just win wars. It rewrites truth. By the time Rome looked closely, he wasn't just powerful. He was necessary. And that's when control becomes almost impossible. Because when people start believing they need one man, they stop asking what that man might become. So the question is, when victory gives a man everything, who is left to take it away? He had already won too much. That was the problem. Julius Caesar returned, not as a servant of Rome, but as a man Rome could no longer control. The victories followed him. So did his army. Loyal, proven, dangerous. And Rome felt it. The Senate watched him from a distance, not with pride, with fear. Because power like his doesn't stay quiet. It grows. They gave him a choice. Lay down your command. Return as a citizen. Or be declared an enemy. It sounded simple. It wasn't. Because to step back meant losing everything he had built. And he knew it. There was a moment, cold, silent, at the edge of the Rubicon River. A small river, easy to cross, but not meant to be crossed. Not by a general, not with an army. That was the line. Invisible, but absolute. Behind him, soldiers who trusted him. Ahead, a republic that feared him. He stood there. Not as a hero, not as a villain. Just a man deciding who he was going to become. Because once he crossed, there was no return. No forgiveness, no middle ground. Just war. He didn't hesitate long. He stepped forward, And with that step, Rome changed forever. Not because the river mattered, but because the decision did. That's how power works. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just one quiet moment, one irreversible choice. So the question is, when everything you've built depends on one line you're not supposed to cross, do you stop? Or do you step forward and become the thing they fear? You didn't turn back. You couldn't. Julius Caesar had crossed the line, and Rome followed him into war. It didn't last forever. It didn't need to, because he was better, faster, more decisive, less willing to hesitate. One by one, his enemies disappeared. Some defeated, some forgiven, some erased. And when it was over, there was no one left to stop him. He returned to Rome, not as a general, as the center of everything. Crowds filled the streets again. They cheered his name. But it felt different now. Quieter, heavier, because power had changed shape. It no longer moved through the Senate. It moved through him. Titles followed. Honors, statues, control. And then, one word made it permanent. Dictator. Not for a season, not for a crisis, for life. It sounded like stability, but it felt like something else. Because Rome had always feared kings. And now, they had something close. Not crowned, but unquestioned. And that's the problem with absolute power. It doesn't just silence enemies. It silences doubt. Even the kind that keeps a man human. So the question is, when a man answers to no one, who is left to remind him where the line was? He trusted them. That was the mistake. Julius Caesar had everything: power, loyalty, control, but not safety. The men around him smiled, stood close, spoke softly, just like before. But something had changed. Not in Rome, in them. Because fear had turned into decision. They told themselves it was necessary, that one man could not hold this much power, that Rome had to be saved, even from him. On that morning, he walked into the Senate. No armor, no army, no suspicion. Just a man who believed he was untouchable. They gathered around him. Closer, closer, and then still. Fast, silent, final. Not from enemies. From friends. From men like Brutus. And in that moment, it wasn't the pain. It was the realization. Power didn't protect him. It isolated him. So the question is, when power pushes everyone away, is betrayal a surprise? Or the only ending left? He was gone. But nothing was over. Julius Caesar left behind more than a body. He left a vacuum. Power rushed in, faster than anyone could control. The men who killed him didn't restore the Republic. They broke it further because Rome had already changed. Too much, too far. One man had shown what absolute power could look like. And now, others wanted it. That's the legacy. Not just his rise, not just his fall, but the line he erased. So the question is, did he destroy the Republic? Or did he simply prove it was already gone?